Well, welcome back to another video, and this time it's the Porsche Cayenne. This is the car that, some of you will not believe this, but this car is nearly 25 years in production now. And also it is nearly 30 years since the company first announced they would be making this car as a joint project with Volkswagen. For many people, they'll say this is the car that saved the brand. That actually, in my view, is the Boxster. That comes out in 97, changes the fortunes of the brand, and then this comes out. And this is the car that then catapults the newfound sort of project that they've been going forward with, which is needing to be able to really make real profits from the brand and then reinvest that into some of the later projects that we've seen, like the GT products, GT3, GT2, and the GT3 RSs and GT2 RSs. For those to exist, this car had to be a success. And as much as there would have been, when these first came out, there was a lot of criticism. Is it a real SUV? Is it a real Porsche? Is it just a Volkswagen in drag? All these sort of things were said about them. I think we can say now, fairly, everyone was wrong. Everyone who criticised this car was wrong. It not only was a phenomenal success, it was a financial success, and it is now, and has been for some time, the best-selling of all the cars. I think they've sold more Cayennes than they've ever sold any other of the marques. The Macan has been chasing it down over the last sort of 10 years of that production, but nothing really has touched the Cayenne. I think it's funny. I think there's a statistic. It's something like, roughly speaking, I don't have it in front of me, and I didn't check this before the video, but it is something like either 1 in 3 or 1 in 2 Porsches ever built have been a Cayenne. Just incredible. Puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? And so first generation, so this is sort of 02 to 2010. If you're looking at one of these, the late engine that comes in this car for some of you is a diesel. Very rare to find, but the very last year of production got a diesel for some markets. I'm not going to talk about that engine in this generation because it's a carryover into the next generation. So if you're waiting for the diesel, that will come up in a minute. Base model is a 3.2. It then becomes a 3.6 when they facelift this car in 2007. If you want a base engine, I would avoid the 3.2. I would go for the 3.6 for two reasons. When I sold cars a while ago, the 3.2. So I used to work for a while. I was at main dealer, and then within the dealer group we had Aston Martin, Lotus, and a few other of the big sort of specialty brands. And the dealer group needed someone that could sort of sell on, it was called a disposal site, but sell on used prestige cars that we couldn't sell in our main dealers. So for example, Aston Martin are not going to put an 8-year-old base model Cayenne on their forecourt. They're just not going to do it. Maybe today, no, probably not, even with the current sales of DBX, they weren't going to do it. So those cars would come into me, I ran a small site, and I would sell them on into the general public. If a car was unable to be sold, then it would go off to auction. And I would meet, some of the other dealers that were selling some of the sort of, we'd call it leggy or prestige stuff. So sort of bit higher mileage, bit chunky, a bit expensive, but now used. And you could see what had happened. First 3 years they've been at the dealer. Straight away after that, they'd gone out of network. They had probably missed a couple of recalls. I'm being very general here because I know someone watching, you're watching this, and you've got a 3.2 Cayenne, and you're thinking, this guy, no, he's completely wrong. You are the 1 in 100, okay? Because you've come onto the internet and found this video and watched it. I'm telling you now, the other 99 out of 100 haven't. And these cars, especially when they were 8-9 years old and I was selling them, the base model Cayenne, first early one that was still just the new shape. They were just about to bring in the Mark II. People wanted the early ones. And then you kind of had the pre-facelift current generation, and you could say that, it was worth a lot more money than it actually was. Always with a base model engine, usually then taken to a VW specialist because it has a VR6 engine in it, and that's also in the R32 Golf. They're very well known with VW specialists. They can be taken care of at a VW specialist. However, the rest of the body is somewhat related to Touareg, not completely related. So they can still throw up big bills. And what I would find is most of the time back then, and bearing in mind we're talking 15 years on from there, so they've either been saved or scrapped, is ditch finder tyres, worn brakes, in need of a service, and just people who had sort of had them as prestige vehicles. And I don't really want to suggest that you go out and buy one of those unless you want it as a bit of a project for yourself, or it's going to be a car that you can use as a winter car and just not care about it too much. Really sad fate to see with those cars, but that's the reality of it. Quite reliable though. So what I do before I make these videos, I set my VPN to different countries and I'll have a look through their classifieds and I'll just see, what's the general market looking like, so that I don't release this and then someone says, well, no, actually, in my local area, they're all perfect. When you look at base ones, I generally go US, UK, Sweden, Germany, Canada, Australia. Those are the countries I'll have a little look around their classifieds. Different countries, different classifieds. I found exactly what I thought I'd find. And it really is 1 or 2 out of 100 have been kept as these cars should have been kept. They've been kept at either a dealer or a specialist. They have proper tyres on them, not the cheapest ditch finders that you can get on a deal, Christmas deal, get 4 for 3 sort of thing. Probably produced in a country that's not paying the sort of wages they should. Anyway, that's a side point. Moving on to the early ones, the one that I'd say the two models that I would talk to people about seriously looking at owning. You can look at a 3.6, by the way, but just be aware, as I've seen, you're going to have to really have your buyer's eye out. I've got a buyer's guide for the E1, E2, E3, so the 3 generations. They'll be linked in the top comments, so you can click on any of those after this video. And as we go through, I'll put cards up as we go through the generations. But that will give you a little bit more detail because you've really just got to have your eye and your wits about you if you're going for a base model. If you're going for a turbo, they have cooling issues. There's all manner of maintenance faults that they can have if they haven't been really well taken care of. And unfortunately, Cayenne S with a 4.5 naturally aspirated V8 and the early turbos haven't been given, I'd say probably about 60% of them haven't been given the love they need. So you need to be looking in that 40%. So 4 out of 10 will be good. 2 out of 10 will be excellent. The rest of them run away from. It's just, you'll spend not a lot of money comparatively to how much these cars cost, but you'll spend a ton on maintenance and you'll think, why don't I just buy a Turbo S that had been really well taken care of, because I've spent so much now on trying to get it back up to scratch. So the 2 cars I'd look at, facelift, GTS. Facelift GTS, I remember driving one of these when they were almost brand new, blown away by it. It just screamed something about this car had been with the company that makes the 911 Carreras, that makes a GT3, all this sort of stuff. It felt like someone had been breathing on this car and said, okay, I know what chassis I've got to deal with here. I want to make something special from it. So it's a 4.8 naturally aspirated V8. It goes really well. It doesn't go like the turbos go. The turbos sort of lift you and deposit you where you're going. The GTS sort of screams there. It's got this driver engagement that the only things I can think today that you could buy, even close experience, the 4.8 IS X5 gave you like a light version of this experience as well. So if you're looking around these early cars, that's something to have a look at. But yeah, the 4.8 V8 GTS, it does need a little bit of work. That's in the buyer's guide, all about the bits and pieces you need to take care of with it. But from a driving experience and from a cost and value perspective, you're getting something special there. It's a bit, I'd say it's a little bit of part of the history of the brand as well now. The other car would be an early Turbo S. It would be 2006, 1 year production. It will cost you quite a bit. However, when I was searching, the nice thing I found about the Turbo S models was most people who bought them understand what they've bought. They didn't want turbo. They wanted a Turbo S because it put them in this little club of people that bought the very best one they could, cost them extra money, they're happy to pay it because every owner before them had that same mindset. Oh, okay, I want something a little bit more powerful, a little bit more special, and something that if you go to a show, you can exhibit. You can say, well, that's the Turbo S of the Cayenne. So it's the first Turbo S. It's the most powerful SUV the brand did at the time. To me, that's something worth looking at seriously. It's a serious contender for a buy. But it will ask a lot of maintenance from you. Fortunately, you'll probably find that owners before you have actually done that maintenance. So you shouldn't be sort of shocked with huge bills like you may be with a Turbo that's possibly had 1 or 2 good owners amongst 3 or 4 who the other 2 haven't really spent the money. That was what I saw searching for the classifieds. So on the E1, on the first generation, 4.8 GTS, that'll be 07, 08, 09, or 2006 Turbo S. If you just want to get one though, try and go for a facelift if you're going to go for a base model, and then you'll get a 3.6 VR6 because that engine carries on a little bit longer than the 3.2. Honestly, if you can find a 3.2 today that's been well cared for, I'd be surprised. I'd say well cared for 20 odd years, spent a lot of money on it. Someone who owns that probably doesn't want to let it go cheap. So, yeah, I would, for me, unless it's a purchase that you just want to try out a Cayenne, I would probably spend a little bit extra, get something a bit higher up. But otherwise, yeah, you can look at the 3.6 on the facelift. Second generation. On the second generation, we switch into diesels. And with the diesels comes an engine that, if you buy one of these and you can find one that's well kept for, there's no reason why it shouldn't run almost in perpetuity. And it is part of the brand's legacy and will actually give you reasonable fuel economy. It's the Cayenne S TDI, or diesel. I shouldn't call it a TDI. That's a VW phrasing. It's just diesel on Porsche models. So it's a 4.2 TDI. That's the engine. That's what it is. It's an Audi engine. It was used. It's used in the Audi A8, but its application is marine. So it's used in Volkswagen's marine engine departments. That makes it just insanely reliable and very, very torquey. They pulled, as a part of the sort of press release, 2012, if I can find some footage of this, I'll post it up as I'm talking now. It might just be a picture, but if I can get some actual imaging. So Air France gave up a few hours fly time of their A380. So good on Air France, because I know that's huge cost to an airline to take a plane out of commission for a few hours, but they managed to arrange it, and they pulled the double-decker A380 with the 4.2 TDI Cayenne S for a new world record at the time. That was part of its original marketing. Straight afterwards, they do it with the Turbo S, just to prove that the petrol-powered model can also do it, even though it's slightly lower on a torque value. I think it's about 50 Newton meters lower in torque, but higher brake horsepower. The point here is you only get this engine for about 4 years, I think, on the Cayenne, and then it's gone. And it's gone forever. As in, after that, there's no V8 TDIs in the brand. There's no TDIs. The 3-litre TDIs also around in the base Cayenne. As an engine that was very popular throughout Europe. Honestly, today, with all of the Dieselgate scandals and everything that's happened, unless this is going to be your first car, your main car, and fuel economy is really critical to you, which I know for some of you it will be. And I know I'm not sort of saying that blasé, but the maintenance side of it, now that car is between 10 and 12 years. If you go for a 3-litre, I'd probably try and pay extra and get a 4.2 and know that you've got part of the company's history, because after this, that's it. A V8 TDI, it's been in just the Cayenne, just the once, just for those years. And it's an absolute powerhouse. You know, you cannot find, I'm sure someone's blown one up, because who hasn't on the internet, but generally speaking, this is one of those engines that just, you don't find very often. If you look in the trucking world, sort of large lorries if you're in the UK, but for everyone else, trucks, big haulage vehicles, they do have crossover sometimes between what the engine application that they use for lugging large loads across the country on road and marine. Okay, so companies that make those engines, Mercedes, Scania, MAN, some of the sort of big US ones as well, they will have crossover between a marine application and what they use on the road. But it's very rare within cars. I'm not going to actually bring up other ones. I'm just going to stick on this one. To be able to have that engine in a car, I think the Touareg gets it as well, but it means you can own a car with reasonable fuel economy. We're talking 30 miles to the gallon here, not 40. But reasonable fuel economy, huge torque. I mean, tow whatever you want. If you can tow a double-decker plane, towing a caravan or a boat or your neighbour's house, whatever you need to tow, you'll be able to do it. And that power delivery on the road is as close as you can get to something like the Turbo and Turbo S model without having that huge loss of fuel economy. So I'd have a serious look at one of those. The 3 litre, if it's been well maintained, great. From speaking to a few friends that have seen these coming in through the automotive world at sort of the 5-year and 10-year mark, generally speaking, this is being general with it, they were on lease plans with the diesels. They were company vehicles. So they got 3 years of very good care, came onto the used market, and then got good care by some people, acceptable care by others, and then in about 40% of cases got ragged to the nines by others who managed to buy them within their budget and wanted to show off that they had this particular car. I'm not trying to make a judgment on anyone there, by the way. I'm just saying, as a used buyer, you just need to be aware of how these cars have sort of worked their way through previous owners. I would, if I wasn't looking at a 4.2 TDI, that's the Cayenne S 4.2 TDI. On the petrol side, supercharged V6, hybrid, and then the V8s. Here, I'm probably going to say that if you can get a hybrid, go for a hybrid, because you've got near sort of diesel fuel economy with a good performer. It's probably the point where we kind of see within car history that a hybrid is going to be the future of sort of car, high-speed cars. You know, you've already had at this point the 918 has been released. So you can see where all car companies are looking at for both their ultimate power delivery with the examples of this car, and you probably can't see it, but the Viron over my shoulder. Those are the only 2 cars really, and a few sort of niche brands that are still sticking with horsepower from an engine rather than a battery pack. And as we know, obviously even Bugatti have now switched to sort of bring in some additional battery aid. And we just see that at this time. About 2015 is when you see the switch over to, if you want great power, get something with a hybrid powertrain, because you're going to get continual torque pretty much for whenever you want it. Does that mean that the turbos are redundant? No, not at all. They still are the ultimate of what you can buy in this generation. I think if you're someone that always wants the ultimate version of something, you can go for a Turbo S. Again, the Turbo is a really difficult one. It's going to be owned by, say, 30% enthusiasts, say 40% enthusiasts, 40% people who wanted the top model but not the very top model. That's actually very common, by the way, within the car trade, in case you're not aware. It's very common that people want the top model but not the very, very top model, because the very top model is usually small production for people who are so enthusiastic, such fans of the brand, that they want something to mark them out. Think like, I don't know, something like a Plus package on an RS6, Audi RS6, you know, they do the Plus. Something like that. Probably not a great example, but I can't think of one immediately off the top of my head. But most manufacturers do this. Range Rovers, you know, in their SV range. Now, you can buy a V8 supercharged one, but then you can buy an SV supercharged one. And really, yeah, it's more bespoke, but you pay a lot extra for it. And that's what happens here. If you're a big fan, you can go Turbo S. For most of you, the Turbo will be enough of a car. But because the hybrid exists, it's really difficult to talk away from the hybrid. I think there is a couple of issues on the regular V6. I think it's cylinder 6, I think it is, can be problematic, but I only really found that on tuned examples. Overall, the engine is pretty solid. I'd stay away from the first year of production. After that, the V6 is fine. The 3.6 VR6 is carried over into this generation, and so if you're sat there and you're saying, I'd love a Cayenne, but I don't really want the risk of a Cayenne, then you're probably just at the point where the base Cayenne with a 3.6 engine in it, if you had it sold, because not all markets get this engine, but you're probably at the point where you can just about get one before it falls into its sort of fourth, fifth owner, where at the fourth, fifth owner stage, it's a gamble. And I'd say it falls into what I was saying earlier. 50% is 50-50 at that point. Every 1 in 2 will go to someone who isn't willing to spend a colossal amount. I mean, there is a lot. Tyres alone will be very expensive to stick with the premium tyres. And having driven several of these cars, when they used to come in, and you drive one on cheap tyres, drive one on the tyres it's supposed to be on, I'm not going to say transformative, because that's probably too much of a leap, but it's like driving, the best example would be with a partially flat tyre. That's the best example I can give you. If you had 4 tyres on the car and one of them is going flat, it just takes everything away from the drive. You can't push the car as much, your economy is not as good, your performance is not as good, and then you pump the tyre up and all of a sudden it comes back to life. That's what the effect is of putting poor tyres on these cars, and the same with the brakes. And my view of it is just, unfortunately, there are some really good actually aftermarket brands. You'll generally find them in the owner forums, and they will say, yeah, if you're going to go non-genuine and owning one of these, as many times as you can, trying to go non-genuine but high specification in the parts department area is advisable, to try and keep the spend reasonable, but clearly not looking for the bargain basement cheap stuff. That will keep the car in tip-top condition without you breaking the bank. Have a real good look through the service book. And if someone comes out with a thick folder and says, oh yeah, I'm really into my Porsches, but I just, didn't want a really powerful one. There's lots of people like that. You'd be shocked, because you're watching this video, so you're probably a car enthusiast. You'd be shocked about the amount of people that want the nice car, do not care about the power. They just push their foot to the floor a little bit more often. It's surprising, but understandable, because 300 horsepower in a car, unless it weighs 10 tons, it doesn't move. But even with 2 tons, it's still 150 horsepower per ton. It's reasonable power to have on the road. If you never go off road with it onto a track or whatever else, which most Cayenne owners don't, and if you never really push cars, you use them in traffic and use them to commute and take your family out and whatever else, you'd be surprised. Most people look at these, and if you can find one of those ones that's been taken care of and someone's just enthusiastic about it and they wanted something that they could be proud to clean at the weekends, then you can go for one. But otherwise, with the V8s and the hybrid, I just would look at the hybrid if I could. The GTS is around in this generation, and the GTS is a favourite of mine throughout the generations. So I'd probably look at a GTS if it's got to be V8. But otherwise, look at the hybrids. And if you want top power, just go Turbo S. Spend the extra money. If you want base, 3.6. But really check you know what you're buying. Third generation, last generation, most recent one. Here, things get a bit easier for me to make suggestions. So you have hybrids again, 2.9 V6 and a 3-litre V6, twin turbo and single turbo. I like the 2.9. I think the 2.9 V6 engine on this, I remember doing the buyer's guide. I try to find, as I always do, I'm trying to find the problems. Most people are trying to find the good stuff, but I want to find the problems so I can tell you, these are the problems, look out for them. Really difficult to find on the 2.9. It just, in every application I could find it, it had performed really well, with the exception of modified units. The engines seem to take well to modifying, but whenever an engine takes well to modifying, it can be at risk of being pushed too far. So if you're looking at one of these and someone says they've had it tuned, but with someone who is a specialist in Porsche cars, and you can go on their website and you say, oh yeah, this is, you know, someone you've heard of, someone you know, maybe not so much of a worry. If they said it's pushing an extra 200 horsepower out of it, start to take a step back. Because if you want that extra power, just go up to the turbo. In fact, just go over to the hybrids. So in this last generation, you get the hybrid applied to both the V8 and the V6 engine. And going for something like a turbo hybrid, 4-litre V8 hybrid, you don't need to go up to the top end then. If you go for the turbo hybrid 4-litre V8, this has most of the issues sort of really refined at this point. The most powerful model on the street, so ultimate power and street power are two different things, because what you can apply on the street for most areas of the world, unless you live somewhere that is incredibly well maintained, the power you can really put down and the way you can deliver that power in roads that have traffic on them, everything else, is limited. Something like a hybrid turbo, 4-litre V8 when you need it, hybrid system to punch you out off the lights, get that weight moving, braking inertia. It's going to be probably the fastest experience for most people. They also pair it up with the 3-litre V6. I think the way I'd put that is, for most of you watching, if I was to split you as an audience, you watching, you may say, well, I just want the most powerful one. But I'm going to put you into a bracket and I'd say you're then in the 10% if you want the most powerful one. 50% of you will want the one that you can enjoy. So something that is powerful enough to enjoy on the road, but isn't going to be something that is always sort of limiting you, breaking the speed limits constantly to a point where you're in license losing territory all the time because the car doesn't really give you the indication it's doing the speed it does. And then there'll be the other 40%, which sort of say, I'm after a nice car. The Cayenne stands out in my mindset. I'm not someone that wants to be spending all of my money all the time on my car. I'd like something that's efficient, that's powerful, that looks good. For all of those people, V6 hybrid. And also the V6, not naturally, I suppose, the V6 non-hybrid. Because of the price difference, I'd probably look at both of those two. You can go into the hybrid, great. If you can't, and especially if you're looking at a long-term purchase, I'd go without the hybrid system, because then you never have a worry that you're going to face a big bill with a battery pack. 2.9, something like that, on its own will do a great job. It will give you the prestige look, get it with a few extras, you've got a great car. The other 40% of you, turbo hybrid would probably be the one I'd look at. The GTS is also a standout. That gets the 4-litre V8. Not the ultimate one of the pack, but if you go for the 2020 to 2023 model, they're about 450 brake horsepower, something like that. It's enough power for all the time, not the most fuel efficient, but you're not going to be pulling up to people who've bought turbo and turbo S's and really feel like, I really feel like I've lost out, sort of thing. You've got great vehicles, something you can be proud to own, something that will feel fantastic on the road, especially if you live somewhere where you can enjoy the roads around you. For the top 10%, who then, in that 40%, I'm putting the hybrid as well, the V8 hybrid, or a few of you maybe can go into the V6 hybrid, because it just depends where you are on that scale. For the top 10% though, the top end hybrid model with the V8 turbo e-hybrid, I think that's called. You get then the GT turbo, about 640 horsepower, without the hybrid assist system. Probably the last chance you'll have to own something like that. Huge power, an engine, just an engine. No huge battery assistance. For me, I have no reason to say don't buy a GT turbo, turbo GT, or GT turbo. Just that it's the very top end of what is there, and unless you are someone that really loves engines, and I know there'll be a few of you out there, but for you, this is the car. For everyone else, you know, if just being the most powerful on the road is the most important, then depending on your budget, say Turbo S hybrid, Turbo E hybrid, those are the two most powerful. And the real world, accelerating off sort of 10, 20 miles an hour to get yourself up to highway speed, they'll just do it in a flash. And especially if you live in an area predominantly with a lot of electric cars around you that are always, you know, dashing away from everything, and you feel the need to keep up, then something like a Turbo E hybrid will do it. It will do it. The Turbo GT is probably more if you buy like the Cayenne Coupe model, and you are actually going to sort of maybe go for a little bit of track driving, or you love sort of your long distance driving and long term ownership, and you'd rather stay away from a battery pack. Those are the reasons I'd sort of go GT Turbo. Otherwise, yeah, your big horsepower is in the hybrid turbos. That's it. That's the whole guide done. So early ones, I'll just give one in each generation because it's very easy for me. First generation, look at the GTS. Second generation, look at the GTS. And the thing I missed out earlier, sorry, I should have mentioned this. In the second generation GTS, it's a V8 for the pre-facelift models. So that's like 2011, 12, 12, 13, 14, something like that. It's a V8. And then in the second half of the production, it switches to a V6 turbo engine. I would look at pre-facelift with the V8 on that GTS. I didn't mention that earlier, but yeah, the GTS in that second generation, it gets two engines, V8 early on, and then switches to a more efficient and actually equally powerful V6. So, but I'd look at the V8 GTS in the second generation. Third generation, GTS. I just think the GTS is such a good Cayenne model. However, it probably does, in my heart of hearts, get beaten out by something like a turbo hybrid that just does so much, so well. And the fact that it can bring, for most of you, quite efficient driving is, I don't know that when the Cayenne was first being developed back in 1997, an engineer thought that someone could really, realistically get 40 miles per gallon out of something with 600 horsepower plus, on average. Anyway, that does it for the Cayenne. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, then subscribe. And if you do, then I shall see you in the next one. Take care.